Here's Guy Wayman, Ben Brunson, and Frank Vernuccio, Inside the News.
Welcome back to our second segment of Inside the News, Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuccio. And this is our international segment. And Ben, let's get right to it. North Korea really trying to threaten the world, not just the United States. And we've got to give it to Nikki Haley. She got a 15-0 vote from the United Nations on Saturday going against North Korea, Ben.
Well, that's the good news. She's proving to be a good UN ambassador, and she did get a strong vote against North Korea to impose and strengthen further sanctions on the regime. The problem is that despite that, this is highly unlikely to have any effect on the behavior of North Korea. They are committed on their path. They see it as their salvation. They see other countries that have nuclear weapons, such as Russia, as gaining superpower status when they otherwise would not have superpower status. And it is a fact that with nuclear weapons, it changes the entire ballgame. So they have so far been rewarded for their program, as we have discussed many times, and we were way ahead of the curve in talking about North Korea a long time ago and saw all of this coming. The fact is that China is not going to take the action to stop the North Korean program, and that means there is, I believe, only one way to stop the program. It's the elephant in the room, and I'm willing to state it. Only military action by the United States can stop it. And interesting about North Korea is we are still at war. The United Nations is still at war with North Korea. The end of the North Korean War came about in July of 1953 by the signing of an armistice. The armistice was a ceasefire. It was intended to set the conditions to enter into a permanent peace agreement between the warring parties, and no such permanent peace agreement has ever been signed. So we are legally at war with North Korea, which means, in my opinion, that the president and, in fact, United Nations member states could take military action against North Korea without the need for any declaration of war or going to the UN for a further type of announcement from the UN or action by the UN. No action by Congress, in my opinion, needs to be taken. And it does open the door for the U.S. to, in a very sudden action, take military action. I think the Chinese will respond on some level in terms of moving into the northern part of North Korea to, at a minimum, create a buffer zone and keep South Korean and American forces from coming close to their border. So I'm not downplaying how serious it would be if we go to war, how bloody it will be, how damaging it will be to the region and certainly to South Korea. But the reality is we have two choices at this point. We either have to take military action to end that program, or we have to live with that program. And if it's the latter, people need to understand we have zero ability, none, to shoot down incoming ICBMs. That ability does not exist. The THAAD missile system does not do that. You cannot currently take out an incoming ICBM at the trajectory and speed it is moving at. So if we're going to live with this type of country and future countries like Iran that we know are going to be on this path, then we better enter into a Manhattan Project to build an anti-ballistic missile capability, an anti-ICBM missile capability that is robust. And it's going to be hugely expensive, and it's going to take a lot of time.
You know, Frank, those are some pretty dire predictions, and I think Ben laid it out well. I didn't know about the 1953 agreement. I thought it was more of a police action, but that is interesting to note, though, Frank, isn't it?
Well, taking Ben's last point first, it was the Ronald Reagan administration that first attempted to put in an anti-ballistic missile system. And, of course, it was soundly mocked by the media. Of course, it was called Star Wars. The Russians took it seriously. In fact, many of the documents that have been released since the fall of the Soviet Union indicate that the Politburo was so concerned about the potential ability of the United States to completely reduce the effectiveness of the Soviet nuclear arsenal, that they believed that their whole approach to international affairs was falling apart. It was a key element in the fall of the Soviet Union. But, of course, the media and the left wing managed to prevent the implementation of the SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. Let's fast forward a couple of decades. As Russia began to become Russia again in its aggressive sense, as China's nuclear capabilities became more and more apparent, there were more calls to put in, again, an anti-ballistic missile system. Who was the chief ringleader against funding an ABM system? Barack Hussein Obama. We are now vulnerable, uniquely vulnerable, as Ben points out, specifically because of the efforts of the Democrat left and Barack Obama. This is a vulnerability that didn't have to exist. The technology is there, the ability is there, but thanks to Obama and the left, we don't have the ability to protect ourselves. Let's go to the UN sanctions. There's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that, of course, we are now an entire world on record as being against North Korea's acts. That's great, wonderful. What's the practical effect of that in reality? The answer is absolute, total zero. Russia and China will continue to assist North Korea's nuclear program surreptitiously, continue to support North Korea's economy, because, after all, everything North Korea is threatening or planning to do strengthens the Russians and the Chinese. They have a patsy, basically, in North Korea that'll distract and possibly destroy significant parts of the United States, if not the United States military, the United States civilian economy, the United States population. Who benefits, as they say in law? China and Russia. They have no intention of throwing away an asset like the North Korean military threat against the United States. So their vote at the United Nations is good public relations for both Russia and China. They will absolutely not go along with it. In reality, we are extraordinarily threatened. One of the things the media continues to ignore is that it doesn't take an old Cold War-style attack of 100 nuclear missiles to destroy the United States. As we've spoken about before, one or two nuclear weapons detonated at the right altitude over the United States can destroy all electrical generating plants in the nation, can destroy all cars, trucks, trains with computer chips in them. The electromagnetic pulse would devastate the United States, and all the predictions are that within 6 months of an EMP pulse delivered by just one or two nuclear weapons, up to 80% of the American population would die, because you would have no way of getting water to the cities, no way of getting food to the cities, no medical facilities could be operative. That's the threat from North Korea. It's not the threat of losing Honolulu or Seattle or Chicago or Washington or New York, any one or all of those cities. It's a threat of devastating the entire United States, literally wiping America off the map. We're not taking that threat seriously. Ben is right. Military action is the only way to go, but there's a problem with that. Because of the misdeeds of the Obama administration in weakening the American military, our armed forces are at their weakest point that they have been in relation to potential enemies around the world for at least the last half century. And that puts us in a horrible situation where we have to engage in military action for the survival of the nation at the same time that our armed forces are the weakest they've been in half a century.
Okay. Boy, great stuff from both of you. Let's go back to even now what Ben was talking about with Reagan, and you even mentioned it as well, Frank. Reagan with Star Wars and all of that. And then along comes Bill Clinton with North Korea. I feel, outside of 9/11 and what happened there, I feel like we were in a coma for those years with Bush number 43 from 2000 to 2008, and then Barack Obama just deep in the coma with more drugs. And so it's like, if you look back, we lost not only 8 years, but we lost 16 years in that time frame with all of what's been going on with North Korea and the rest of the world, Ben.
Well, let's break it down into a couple of pieces. With Bill Clinton, we the entire country, and I would say the Republican Party as much as the Democratic Party, looked inward. The Cold War ended as Bill Clinton was taking office, and we had a euphoric attitude towards the global picture. The great enemy we had been facing for 50, 60 years prior, communist threat, the threat of nuclear extinction, that faded away, and we turned inward and we cut our military spending. As a result, it was probably a rational thing to do in light of what we thought the world looked like during the 1990s. We learned on September 11th, 2001, that we had a false picture of what was going on out there. Mm-hmm. And, of course, for George Bush, he was consumed with reacting to 9/11 and the threat of Islamic terrorism, and that led to really downplaying some of the other emerging issues that the United States faced. And North Korea was certainly high on that list. We made a big mistake under the Clinton administration to enter into a deal that is almost identical to the deal that Obama entered into with Iran, in which we took the North Koreans' word that they would not develop nuclear weapons in return for easing sanctions and all sorts of things, all sorts of goodies we got them. We were told by President Clinton that there was a robust inspection regime that which would ensure that North Korea could not possibly go nuclear. All the same wording, all the same ideas and concepts that drove the deal with Iran undertaken by the Obama administration. For the Obama administration, all they ever did was punt all of these issues, whether it was the Middle East and just sitting back and watching ISIS come to the fore, or dealing with Iran or Korea. The fact is that Barack Obama had no stomach to deal with any issue internationally, so everything was just pushed down the road for the next guy to worry about. The next guy is Donald Trump, and now he faces it. I do not think he's a guy who will push these issues down the road for the next president. And in fact, we are running out of that type of runway. We are facing a real situation. North Korea detonating a 10 or 15 kiloton warhead inside a mountain somewhere inside North Korea is one thing. But when you mate that with the proven capability now to launch an ICBM, we have a true existential threat against the United States, as Frank very clearly pointed out. And what Frank said is not science fiction. It is not debated. It is fact. It is physics. It is electromechanics, and it is reality. An EMP attack can bring down our entire grid coast to coast, and the effect of that would be catastrophic and existential to the United States. So these are the realities, and it's left to Donald Trump to face this reality, and he's going to have to lead. These are very tough decisions that have to be made because we have punted the ball down the field for 15 to 20 years under preceding administration.
You know, Frank, Ben laid out the timeline very well, didn't he?
Yeah, he certainly did, particularly the astute comparison between the deal we struck with North Korea, where we gave food aid to Pyongyang in return for their promise not to develop nuclear weapons, and the ridiculous deal that the Obama administration struck with Iran, which basically gave them billions of dollars in return for nothing more than a couple of years hiatus in their nuclear program. It's fascinating that apparently nothing was learned from North Korea at all. Everything that's going on in North Korea today is what will go on, assuming we're all still here, with Iran in just a couple of years. But the timetable looks like it's being moved up faster and faster. The fact that the Iranian rocket blast, which put a satellite into orbit, was followed just a day or two later by the North Korean ICBM test, and other information indicates more and more that Iran and North Korea are working together. And let's stretch that just a bit. Since Russia supplies Iran with advanced weaponry to protect their military sites, and China provides the basis for the North Korean economy, such as it is, to continue to exist, you really are looking at a unified axis of evil of Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. It's a reality that the American people don't seem to want to face, or that the media doesn't want to talk about. It is the largest enemy we have ever faced as a nation in terms of geography, technology, industry, and population. And yet there is no sense of the impending threat to the continued existence of the United States. This would not be like losing a war in Vietnam. This would be a war for the survival of the United States as an entity itself. And we're simply not dealing with that reality.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. There's more to talk about. We're going to talk about this article with Google, and we still have more to talk about as far as this TNT. It's a special medical development, and we've only got a short segment coming up. We want to thank you for listening. We want to thank you for following us on YouTube. WBV Inside the News is the channel. Like us and follow us there. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.